Good morning, this is Tricia from Tricia Stamps. Welcome back to my channel. And today we're going to be making this beautiful floral card using some products from the new mini catalog from Stampin' Up. This is the January to April 2024 mini catalog. And the products that we're going to work with are the Enduring Beauty bundle. So it is a 3-part bundle. It has a stamp set, a die set, and a masking set, and they all coordinate. And the projects are just beautiful. So let me show you what we're working with. So here's the stamp set. It's a very large floral cluster, beautiful for coloring, a couple of little tiny flowers that you could add to make it more full if you wanted, and then some really pretty sentiments that are script and block letters combined, which I love. So there's the stamps. You have a die set that has a pretty label shape, cuts out your large floral images and those little stamped buds, and then also a couple of independent leaves and foliage here that are very pretty. And the really cool part, my favorite part about this and what caught my eye immediately when I was going through the catalog, are the layered masks. So these masks are, let me get this out of the way so hopefully you can see better, but it's 5 different masks. You might be able to see on camera, I'm not sure. They do have a number etched into them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You don't have to do them in that order, but if you're just starting out and you're kind of learning how to use masks like this, that's super helpful. They also have a notch in the upper left corner. So part of what this helps with is, like for example, the number 2. You wouldn't want to try to orient your mask with it upside down. So having the number 2 on there in the correct orientation helps you know which end is up and which side of the mask is the correct side. Now, if you flip them all over, you could do it the opposite way, but they have to be consistent. So when you layer all of the different parts of these masks, and they look kind of funny on their own, but you end up getting all the shading and everything to fill in the stamped image or to just do the masking on its own. So let me show you an example. Oops, I don't want to get my little pieces connected. This is a different card. This isn't the one we're making today, but this one I stamped the image in black, and then I used the masks to fill in. So let me show you. If I try to kind of line this up, you can see this first mask covers everything behind the flower. So all of the leaves and all of the background, and then you would just add some ink and that would color in the lightest shade of the flowers. Then the next mask covers up the flowers and, well, let me get it situated right. Covers up the flowers and just allows you to add some ink to color in the leaves. So I have a label here which is getting in the way, but I'm just trying to give you an idea of how the layering of colors work. So those first 2 are sort of your background colors where you would layer in maybe your lightest shade. Then you have another 2 that add the details. So you can see there's darker ink in the flowers to add that depth, and then darker ink in the leaves. So this one would provide your detail area in the leaves, and this one provides your detail area, like your shading in the flowers. So it kind of does all the work for you. It's really, really cool. There's the 5th mask is, I didn't use on this card because it stamps in the flower centers, but this will allow you to ink in the flower centers, which we're going to use today. So hopefully that's not too confusing. You'll get a chance to see it in action when we work on this card. You can see the difference between the 2. In this card, I did not stamp the outline, so you get kind of a softer background look. And in this card, it's much more crisp and defined, and you get the outline. So both ways are beautiful. And then, of course, you could just stamp this outline and color it in any other way you please with your blends or with watercolor markers or however you'd like. So let's go ahead and start on this card. And to do this, we are, as I said, just using the masks. And I'm starting with a piece of plain white paper. I've cut this down just a bit smaller than my card front, so it's 4 by 5 1/4. And we're going to look for stencil number 1. And I have my notch up in the upper left-hand corner. And let's do... Let's see, I'm going to go on my grid paper here, and I want my flowers to be in this corner and this corner. I think, you know, typically you might do it right in the center so you can get that whole cluster in the middle of a panel, but for this card project, I'm going off to the sides. So I'm going to put just a little bit, where's my seal? Just a tiny bit of seal on the middle of my grid paper. I'm even going to touch it with my fingers so it's not super sticky. And I'm going to put my paper down. That's going to hold that in place. And just with a pencil, I'm going to mark the corners of where my paper goes. I'm using my grid lines, but that'll help me remember which grid line I've lined up with. And then I'll take my first mask layer, and I've got the number 1, and I know I have the notch in the upper left corner, and I really want this hanging off the edge of this corner, so I'm going to put my mask at a weird angle. And again, I'm going to mark my corners so I know roughly about where to put that. But once you get the first layer put in, it's pretty easy to line up. So I'll show you how I do that. I'm going to take a little Post-it tape. You could use Post-it notes for this, but I'm going to use that to tape the edges of my mask where it's overlapping on my cardstock. So this will prevent me from going off the edge and getting ink onto the cardstock over here, and it also holds my mask in place. I'm going to start with a light color. I'm starting with the Bubble Bath ink and one of our blending brushes. And I use my blending brush for all of the color families. So this might have some dark pink on it still, so I'm just running some of that color off on my grid paper. So let's just load it with the Bubble Bath. Yep. Tap a little of that excess off, and then I'm just going to go ahead and put Bubble Bath ink all through the stencil, and I am just using a circular motion, starting with light pressure and then building up a little pressure as I go. And that's it. Super duper simple, right? That's my first layer. Just kind of looks like pink blobs now, doesn't it? And then I'm going to switch my paper around, put my mask back in place. And again, it does not have to be exact over here because we're not lining anything up yet. And then I will cover up my edges again, and I'm going to do the same thing. Just a light layer of Bubble Bath ink. I even did that one a little lighter, so that's fine. All right, so that's our first layer. Layer number 2. This has a number 2 etched here, and I've got my notch in the upper left corner. So I'm going to get my mask oriented, and then I'll fine tune it. So I know, I'm not starting with it like this, right? I'm starting with it in the same general orientation that I had it. But now I'm going to look through at the parts that I've already inked, and I'm going to match up the edges of the stencil so that they're exactly lined up. Now, what the parts that I'm looking at are this leaf right here has like a little notch where a flower overlaps it, and then this leaf has flowers overlapping it also. The bottom of this one does too. So if I line up the bottom of these 3 leaves with the inked flowers below, might be harder to see on camera than in real life, but if I get those lined up, then I know that my leaves are going to fall in the right spot. And then I just tape that in place, just like I did before. Cover up those two edges, and then let's switch to our garden green ink. Oops. Where to put my garden green? So here's the garden green. Again, always tap off. See how you get the bristle marks the first time you touch the paper? I always kind of get it going, and that spreads the ink around on the bristles so that you're not going to get clots of color. And I'm just going to put a light application swirling around that ink through the stencil. This is my first layer, so I don't want it too dark. And you can see that, you know, half of these leaves are off the paper, so I'm not even worried about those. So we'll lift this up. And you can see the first layer of leaves there. Let's switch our paper around and do our other corner. And again, I am using, you can see how I can see through here to the pink. I'm using that to guide me and to make sure that my stencil is aligned. And then I will drop it in place. And then you can see my pencil marks here land right on either corner. So that's correct, but I'm using my guide as my top priority. If the pencil marks are a little off, that's okay. And then I'm just going to ink over it again. I don't mind if my leaves from this bunch are overlapping the leaves from the other bunch. That's okay. And I'm using a light, kind of lightish amount of ink because we're going to build on top of that with our next layer. So after stencils 1 and 2, that's what we have. This will just clean up with your chamois, or you can use a baby wipe or whatever. I'm just going to set that aside for now, but we'll do the cleanup later. All right, so, oops. Number 3 is what I want. This one's probably the most, I don't know, I would say difficult to determine what it is because it's all the, let me get my paper in place, but it's all the little detail bits of the flowers. So again, orient your stencil the way we had it. And this flower right here has like a pretty distinct bottom edge. And I am using that. So if I'm looking through my stencil, I'm using that to help me get lined up exactly the way I want. There's also a little edge here that is the shape of that leaf below it. So if you match that edge up with your inked leaf below it, then you'll have really good alignment. The other thing I would say is that if you're off a little in your alignment, this is still going to turn out beautiful because these colors are still going to create the shapes that you're looking for. And of course, this is even easier to do over the stamped image because you have those hard outlines that are so much easier to see. So I'm going to go to Melon Mambo ink now. And I'm using that same pink blending brush. And see how dark that is right off the bat? I'm going off here on my grid paper first to just blend some of that in. And then I'll use the blending brush to apply a layer of Melon Mambo ink. You can use 2 different inks like I'm doing, or you can use the same color ink, which I'll do for the leaves, and just add more of it and a little harder pressure. So, you know, we did a really light application of the garden green. The first layer of the leaves, we're going to do a darker application on the second layer. So look at this magic when I pull this off. Look how pretty that looks. See how it just added all that background detail, the deep shadows. Now let's put our paper back in place and our stencil back in place, and I'm looking through at this green leaf here to get that aligned. and twist it a little bit so that the flowers up here are lined up. And then repeat the same process with that Melon Mambo ink to give us our shading on the flowers. Okay, so that's the flower portion. Now we're going to do the same thing with the leaves. So this is stencil number 4. And again, I'm looking at this leaf right here and then at the bumps at the bottom of these leaves where the flowers overlap, and I can line it right up. Let's see, there we go. There we go. The other thing that I look at in this one is this little bud down here lines up exactly with the shape that we did in the first layer. So I'll put my Post-it tape back in place, switch back to my Garden Green ink. I'm going to close up the Melon Mambo. We're done with that. And with the Garden Green ink, now I'm just going to use a little bit more ink, a little heavier pressure, to drop in some shading and definition on those leaves. Working in a circular motion also allows you to really get into all of the different spots. If you kind of only go in one direction, you might drag over some of the little openings in your stencil and you wouldn't get as good of coverage. So try to work in circles. If you need to pick up extra ink, you can kind of pick it up off of the background areas of your mask because it's slick, so that ink just kind of sits on top. And then look how pretty. Our flowers are starting to look like flowers, right? So let's flip it around. We'll do the same thing on the other side. Get these in place. So I'm looking at this bud right here to get that lined up. And then I'm looking at those bumps and those bumps to make sure that my edges of the bumps are lined up with the edges of the flowers. And then we'll add green ink again. I didn't tap off my ink this time. I should have. But if you're working in tighter little areas like this, the blotches are not as noticeable because you're not going to have a big open space with those bristle marks. You can also kind of start your blending on the mask and then work into your open areas, which is kind of what I'm doing. I didn't go on the grid paper, but I did start on the edge of the mask. So that is layer number 4. Our final layer is going to be dropping in the centers of our flowers. And I'm going to use Berry Burst for that. And this one, there aren't, the layers of the flowers kind of go like on top of the other flower details. So there's 2 spots I'm paying attention to. This little hump right here and this little hump right here. Excuse me. And this little hump right here. So if I look through to this hump, I'm trying to show you this light colored hump, and then it's off the edge of my paper, but there's a light colored hump on this flower. And if I get those lined up, the rest of them really just fall in the middle of the flowers, and it really doesn't matter if it's off because they're not really lining up. So it's this one and this one to pay attention to. And then I will just tape my edges again. I do have a different blender brush for this color because it is quite dark and it's more of a purpley pink, so I do have one blender brush for that color. And I am just going to blend that Berry Burst in rotating in both directions to make sure that my flower centers get filled in nicely. And I'm making these pretty dark. Picking up some extra ink from the side of my mask. And look at that. Isn't that awesome? I just think this is so pretty. Even without the stamping, you can create this a little bit of a softer background image, which is, as the card we're making today, that's going to be a background. So I'm using the humps on that one and over here. And I'm also looking at my 2 corner marks to make sure I'm kind of in the right angle. The ones I made with pencil on my paper, on my grid paper. And then we'll just go in with the berry burst. Using quite a lot of ink, a little bit of a heavier hand to give us those beautiful flower centers. So how pretty is that? I absolutely love it. All right, now if you look at our sample, see how my paper is all white in the background and my sample's a little green in the background. That is totally your choice. This is really pretty as is. You could put a sentiment across the front of that and call it a day. But for me, I wanted this to be the background because we're gonna do some other stuff in the foreground here. So I am gonna take a very light application of Garden Green and I'm just gonna go lightly around my edges a little bit. See how light that was? And just into those open white areas so they're not so stark. I'm not covering up my whole flowers. I don't want to turn my flowers muddy brown, but I'm just kind of dragging my green up this way, and then just on these couple of open edges. See how that softens the background a little bit? All right, now we're done with our blending and we're gonna move on to die cutting. If you guys want, I'll show you just how easy. Get our tape off of here. If you have a decent piece of like Post-it tape or a Post-it note, I save this. I stick it to the underside of my desk and reuse it. If it's totally full of ink, you might want to move on. But I'm just going to take my chamois, which is full of ink, but it is damp, and see that ink just wipes right off those stencils. And then just give it a second to air dry. You could rinse this like in a under the sink or like in a little bowl of water or something, but the chamois works great. So that's all clean now. I will say with these where you have these fine areas, just be a little careful that you're not tearing up the little pieces like this of your stencil. I kind of work in the opposite direction just to make sure that I'm not damaging the shape of those leaves. I might need to rinse all the excess ink out of here, but you can see it just kind of wipes up. Might need to get a clean chamois here, but see how clean that comes? It's nice. All right, so I'll do the rest of my cleanup later, but I just wanted to show you how nice and easy that works. And now I have a very messy grid paper, but that's okay. All right, so the next step is to cut, hopefully you can see in the video here, but I have cut out a couple of shapes right out of the center of my panel and just popped them up for some dimension. For that, I'm borrowing some dies from another new set. This is the Thoughtful Expressions die set. This will be featured in another video on my channel, and I'm just taking these label dies. They nest inside of one another. I'm taking the 2 largest ones, and I am going to center them right in the middle of my panel that I just inked. Don't be scared, and we're just going to cut right through the panel. So let me bring over my Stampin' Cut and Die machine, and we'll zoom out a little bit so hopefully you can see all of that. And I'm just eyeballing the center, just kind of making sure I have even space all around and that my edges are parallel. And I'm gonna use a little Post-it tape to hold that so that it stays nice and even. And then I'm gonna put the next die right inside of it, and I'm looking at the gap all the way around and making sure it's even on both sides and that I'm creating like a consistent little frame. And then I'm going to tape that in place also. There we go. I put on my top plate. Well, while I'm at it, might as well do my other die cutting too. So in the Enduring Beauty stamp set, as I mentioned, you have the floral dies and the one that cuts out the stamped image, but there's also this pretty label. We're going to use this, and we're going to use a couple of these open leaf dies. So these don't coordinate with any stamps. They're just a standalone die. I'm going to use some Garden Green. Let me look at my sample and see how many of these I used. Oh, I actually just used 2. I used one of the single leaf and one of the double leaf. You get 2 of each in the die set, but on the card it looks like I just used 1. And then I'm also gonna, from a little piece of Bubble Bath cardstock, I am going to cut the label shape. So let's get that in there. For those, I don't need to do any taping because they're not lining up with anything perfectly. So I'm just gonna put my plate on and crank everything through. And I'll show you what I get. Okay, so here are my pieces. I'm just popping all the little inside parts of these leaves out, and you can use your take your pick tool to get those little things. So see how they're open like that? They've got little openings in the middle, different pretty shape. And then I carefully peel my Post-it tape. There we go. And now I have a frame and our centerpiece, and they all nest together inside of our background piece. So it keeps our pattern, but it's going to allow us to pop up that middle. I'm going to stamp our sentiment on the label. I'm going to use the Berry Burst ink, and this stamp says, "You mean so much to so many." I like that. And I'm just going right in the middle with that. So that comes right from the same set, the Enduring Beauty. And that's it for stamping on this card. And now we can put it together. So I have a Bubble Bath card base. And I'm going to center our background piece, but I want to wrap a little bit of ribbon around it first. So I have a piece of Bubble Bath ribbon, and I'm just going to cut it slightly longer than this piece. And we'll put a little bit of seal on either side and then wrap the ribbon around it. You can use your grid paper to make sure that's centered. Let's see. Do that. I'll wrap it around the front. There we go. And again, just make sure it's coming right up the center. Cut off our excess. So I've got a piece that just goes across like that. And then we'll put our popped up pieces on either side. So let's add a little bit more seal. And center this on the card front. Now, if these get out of whack, you need to make sure that you've got them in the right orientation. So if you put this way, actually, because mine are lined up, they're actually good in either direction because I had my paper exactly the same. But if you did this without, it's hard to explain. I guess I'm not doing a good job of it. But if your flowers weren't exact, you need to make sure that you just have this the right way. Make sure that it lines up right the way you cut it. Okay, oops, I've got a little piece of Post-it tape on there still. Peel that off carefully. There we go. So on this first little frame piece, I know it's pretty thin, but I'm going to put some dimensionals, and I'm going to take my mini dimensionals, find my scissors somewhere, hit the mini dimensionals, and I'm going to cut, the mini dimensionals have this outer edge. I'm just going to cut a little strip along that outer edge. So you've got this long skinny piece. If you have the dimensional strips, you can use those too, but I'm just going to cut little sections here. Same thing with that. There. And now I've got these long skinny bits of dimensional, and I can use those. And I'm going to try to focus on the corners a little bit so they don't lift up. And I'm going to add a little dimension behind this skinny frame. I forget, this has a technique name when you cut the middle out of a design and then the design continues, like stays continuous through your die cut piece. I cannot remember what the name of it is. If somebody knows, just mention it in the comments, because I know there is a name for this technique, but I forget. All right, so I've got these skinny little strips. I'm going to take off all the backings. Come on, being stubborn. And then I'm going to, right on top of my ribbon, I'm going to put this right back in place. So that my pattern of the flowers and the leaves continues along, but now we've got that piece popped up. For the middle piece, we're going to double deck our dimensionals. So I'm going to take a couple of full dimensionals here, put 4 of them on here, peel my backings off, and then I'm going to layer more dimensionals. So we're getting really, really dimensional on this card, but I want this to pop up even higher than that frame. So I'm just going to go right on top with another layer of dimensionals. And hopefully you can see how that's double thick there. And then that is going to go right into the open spot. Again, right on top of that ribbon. There we go. So hopefully you can see that we've got like a stair step going on here where you have the, hopefully you can see that, but you have the flat layer and then you have the single dimension layer and the double dimension layer. It really looks cool in person. It just pops that up, but you still see your whole stenciled inked design. Super pretty. And now from here, I just added my sentiment, and I did that flat. I think we have enough dimension going on now, so I'm just adding some seal and popping that right in the middle, centering that between the edges of the label, just like that. And I'm gonna use some liquid glue to tuck the leaves right behind my sentiment. I have my Tombow multi-purpose glue. I have it moved into like a fine tip applicator. So it's the same product, it's just in a different applicator bottle. And I'm just gonna tuck that under this corner and tuck the single leaf under the other corner. And if you notice, I'm putting just a little bit of, just a little dot of glue, and I only put it on the base of the leaves and the stem because they're going to hang over the edges here, so I don't want that part to be tacked down. There we go. And the last thing I did, well, no, 2 more steps. I took a little piece of ribbon, just a little swatch, and I folded it in half like this and cut my ends. And I'm going to use a couple glue dots. I'm going to use 1 glue dot on the back of my fold and peel that off. And then I have another glue dot. If I open it up, I have another glue dot on the inner side of the fold. So that's going to hold our ribbon together, like folded in half like that. And then I just took some tweezers and I just tucked that in between my 2 layers. So I'm on top of the frame layer, but under this layer. And I'm just giving that a press and letting those little pieces of ribbon pop out a little bit. Oh, I forgot I had a little bit of tackiness back there. It almost looks like there was a knot tied back there and these are the tails or something, but just to add an extra little bit of ribbon. And then my final step was to add a little touch of metallic silver accents. This comes in a combo pack with gold and silver and copper. And I'm just going to add a couple dots. And then when I'm making kind of the top of my little Hershey Kiss, I do a little swirl. It looks kind of pointed when you first do it, and then it'll settle down into a nice round dot. And you do need to give this time to dry. So I would say you need to give this a good half hour. And I'm always careful to put this somewhere really far away from me so that I don't stick my elbow in it or drag another piece of paper through the top of it. So, like you can see, that one is a really tall point on it. As it sits, that'll go down and turn into a nice little dot. I also put right in the centers of my flowers, I put kind of larger dots. Oop, that one has a little bit off the edge. There we go, I got it. So wherever your flowers are showing, like this one's tucked behind the ribbon, so I'm not bothering with it. But there, now I've got just a little bit of a nice silver accent. And I will set that aside to dry for a good half hour or an hour. And then I have this beautiful card. So here are my finished products using the Enduring Beauty Suite, or not suite, I guess, but bundle, 3-part bundle. And I love how many options. Like I said, I showed you this other card at the beginning. You can get such different looks from this pack, from this bundle, depending on how you use it. So I liked the softer background flowers on this one, just using the stencil and no stamps. I think it's so pretty. So I hope you guys were inspired by these couple of projects, and maybe you want to give this bundle a look in your new mini catalog. Thanks for joining me today. Have a terrific day, and I'll see you soon. So I just want to finish up by saying that if you don't have a demonstrator of your own and you're interested in these projects, I will always link the my shop in the description box below. So you can click that link and then just hit shop now, and that'll take you directly to the Stampin' Up! Store, and you can purchase any of these products. And again, this is Enduring Beauty. So, and of course, if you ever have any questions or want to comment on the card, I'm always happy to answer and would love to become your demonstrator if you're looking for one. Thanks so much. Have a great day.